Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Millicent Walker. We begin with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, talking about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has met with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak for a meeting at the British leader's country residence. Mr. Zelensky is the first foreign leader Mr. Sunak has hosted at his Chequers residence since taking office in October. Downing Street said in a statement that British Prime Minister will announce a new package of military support for Ukraine. The statement adds that Mr. Sunak will confirm the further UK provision of hundreds of air defence missiles and further unmanned aerial systems, including hundreds of new long-range attack drones with a range of over 200 kilometres. The package will be delivered over the coming months as Ukraine prepares to intensify its resistance against Russia's invasion. Mr. Zelensky's trip to the UK follows an announcement by the British Defence Ministry that Britain has delivered Storm Shadow long-range cruise missiles to Ukraine ahead of the highly anticipated counter-offensive.
And you are actually the first foreign leader that I've had the privilege of welcoming here as Prime Minister. And there's a lot of great history here. In fact, this room that we're standing in, Winston Churchill made many of his famous speeches in World War II from this room. And in the same way today, your leadership, your country's bravery and fortitude are an inspiration to us all. I look forward to us discussing what more we can do to support you and your country.
First of all, thank you very much. You supported already a lot for us. You did a lot, you, your government and His Majesty, the King, and of course your people, your society. We're very thankful from all our hearts, from Ukrainians, from our soldiers. We are thankful. And this privilege to be here. Yes, the first time. You said not the last?
Definitely not the last.
So we, of course, we'll discuss very important issues, urgent support for Ukraine and security. For, I think not only for Ukraine, it's important for all the Europe. So thank you that you hosted me and invited me.
Well, it's great to have you here, my friend. Thanks for being here. Thank you, everyone.
Well, everyone is hoping that more of those visits would not involve the talk about war, but to talk more about this visit, our London correspondent joins me now, Juliana Leinker. Hi, Juliana. We've seen Ukrainian President Zelensky make the surprise trip to the UK for talks with Prime Minister Sunak. Talk to us some more about details of that meeting.
Good afternoon, Millicent. Well, you're quite right. We were all pretty surprised this morning to get the announcement from Downing Street that Volodymyr Zelensky would be arriving in the United Kingdom for his third official visit since the war erupted in February last year. And as we've just seen from that track you were just playing, he met Prime Minister Rishi Sunak not in 10 Downing Street, but at Chequers, which is the grace and favour home for the Prime Minister. It's just outside of London. And they had substantive talks that lasted for about 2 hours. And this is all part of Zelensky's European tour, as some people are calling it, because, of course, on the weekend, he met the Pope, he met the Italian Prime Minister, he secured a further €1 billion defence aid from Germany. Then he was with Emmanuel Macron in Paris. And then, of course, in the United Kingdom with Rishi Sunak at the beginning of his premiership. Lots of people weren't sure whether or not that strong partnership would remain because, of course, he famously had that with his successor, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who actually became a Ukrainian citizen just before he was ousted from office. But from the looks of social media and the kind of warm hug and the embrace they had when Zelensky got off his helicopter, that strong partnership does remain. And there was a very brief news conference just after the negotiations where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak did pledge to send more air defence missiles. This is on top of a range of things that we've been doing for Ukraine since February 2022. One of them being is that we've sent over £2.3 billion worth of aid. I believe this is more than any other country apart from the United States. And Rishi Sunak has pledged to do even more this year, on top of the fact that he has agreed to send those air defence missiles. They also spoke about training, and I believe in the past sort of 18 months, about 15,000 Ukrainian troops have been trained in England. The last time Zelensky was here, which I believe was in February, he actually went to go and see those troops. He obviously also had that famous handshake with King Charles at Buckingham Palace. It was less pomp today. I suppose the Ukrainian president is probably tired. He is the hero president who has been busy. Not much information given to the media as well. However, Ben Wallace, the Defence Ministry, was quickly called into the Palace of Westminster to speak to a cross-party of MPs to discuss the details of what's happening with Ukraine, because, of course, we want to assist as much as possible, but the UK is going through its own cost of living crisis at the moment. So any penny that is being sent there has to be accounted for.
And Juliana, Britain has frequently been the first country to sort of offer Ukraine new capabilities and support. Many wonder if, this move by the UK will prompt similar offers from, other allies.
Potentially, yes. I think that is probably seen to be the way. However, I believe this is the fourth European country that Zelensky has visited in just a matter of days, and Britain has come forth in that list. I think the meeting with Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, on Sunday was crucial because there are some suggestions that at the beginning of the war, Germany wasn't as keen to defend Ukraine as much as possible. However, the aid that Germany is sending to them has reached over 7 billion euros. But I think, Britain, under Rishi Sunak's administration, does appear to be the leader of the Western Front. In some of the sound bites that I heard earlier today, Rishi Sunak was talking a lot about fighter jets and the fact that he wants to urge the Western allies to approve the use of fighter jets in Ukraine. I believe America has an overarching responsibility for that. But certainly, I think Britain maintains its position as being the leader of the Western Front, battling alongside Ukraine in the aggression that Russia has put forward. And Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky are very grateful for that.
And, we've seen him. You've mentioned another visit from the Ukrainian president. But many wonder, aside from the weapons from the UK, do you see Ukrainian president visiting the prime minister again, this time for peace sakes? Is the UK in any way standing to broker peace between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, later this week, alongside the other G7 leaders, Sunak will be heading to Hiroshima in Japan for G7 talks. He did say in his news conference that he will use that platform to pledge more support from the West. But in terms of being a peace broker between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, no, that is not the position that Britain are playing in this war. Certainly at the beginning, before Russia invaded, Britain was relying on NATO, being a NATO member, to usher in peace, and that fell through the floor. Even though it does seem like the right and appropriate thing to do, that is not the position, unfortunately, Millicent, that Britain are playing in this duel. But certainly they feel that supporting and defending Ukraine as much as they can is the best way forward.
Juliana, will continue to monitor the developments. Many thanks for joining us. Well, talking about one of those rare visits of the Ukrainian president, he arrived France yesterday for a dinner meeting in Paris with French President Emmanuel Macron. The French presidency said earlier that Mr. Macron would affirm France's military and humanitarian support for Ukraine at the meeting. In a statement, the Élysée Palace said the two leaders would hold working dinner during which Mr. Macron would reaffirm the unfailing support of France and Europe to restore Ukraine's legitimate rights and defend its fundamental interests, adding that the two presidents will also discuss the longer-term prospects for the return of peace in Europe, notably on the basis of the peace plan proposed by President Zelensky, which France supports. Mrs. Zelensky was welcomed by French Prime Minister and French Foreign Minister as he stepped out of his plane. In the meantime, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says Germany will support Ukraine as long as needed. Speaking during a joint news conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Mr. Scholz said, "I have said it many times and I repeat it here today. We will support you for as long as it is necessary." The Ukrainian leader, who was visiting Berlin since the start of the Russian invasion in February last year, said Kyiv would always be grateful to Germany for its support during the war, adding that Ukraine's Western allies could make Russia's defeat irreversible as early as this year. The German government announced 2.7 billion euros of military aid to Ukraine over the weekend, its biggest of such package yet since the war broke out. The new military aid package includes 30 Leopard 1 A5 tanks, 20 Marder armored personnel carriers, more than 100 combat vehicles, 18 self-propelled howitzers, 200 reconnaissance drones, 4 Iris-T SLM anti-aircraft systems, and other air defense equipment. Well, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz wished Mr. Zelensky good luck with Ukraine's planned counter-offensive against Russia. He also added Ukraine was ready for peace, but that it could not mean freezing the conflict and accepting a deal dictated by Russia. Ukraine is expected to launch the major counter-offensive operation in the coming weeks to try to recapture tracts of its east and south from Russian forces who launched a full-scale invasion last year. Well, staying with Germany, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky collected the prestigious Charlemagne Prize on behalf of the Ukrainian people in honor of services to Europe. Mr. Zelensky flew by helicopter to the western city with Chancellor Olaf Scholz following talks in the German capital. He received a standing ovation at the ceremony in Coronation Room of the Town Hall, where he was awarded the prize, which celebrates services to European unification. Ukraine has pushed its allies for help to become a member of the EU and the NATO military alliance, efforts that became more urgent after the Russian invasion last year. Well, still on Ukraine, Zelensky, he held talks at the Vatican over the weekend with Pope Francis, who said in late April that the Vatican was involved in a peace mission to end the war with Russia. Mr. Zelensky, who was visiting Rome for the first time since the war began, spoke with the Pope for 40 minutes and presented him with a bulletproof vest that had been used by a Ukrainian soldier and later painted with an image of the Madonna. The Ukrainian leader last met the Pope at the Vatican in 2020, and the two have had several phone conversations since the war began. At the start of the war, the Pope tried to take a balanced approach in hopes of being a mediator, but later began forcefully condemning Russia's actions, comparing them to some of the worst crimes against Ukraine during the Soviet era. While still staying with the Ukrainian president, he thanked Italians for their support as he visited Rome over the weekend for the first time since the war began. Mr. Zelensky said at a news conference standing alongside Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, "On behalf of all Ukrainians, I'm grateful to all Italians whose hearts do not remain indifferent to evil and who support us with aid in defense." Meloni condemned Russia's brutal and unjust aggression, pledged Italy's support for Ukraine for as long as is necessary, and urged Russia to immediately withdraw. She emphasized Italy's support for Ukraine's membership of the European Union and the intensification of a partnership with NATO. Well, Ukrainian president has been in talks with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, urging him to help implement Kyiv's peace plan to end the war with Russia. Mr. Zelensky made the remarks in a video address from Rome a day after Mr. Ramaphosa spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin. South Africa has positioned itself as neutral in the conflict. Well, back to the EU, where Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell said the European Union must speed up the supply of ammunition to Ukraine as the country's forces need 1,000 artillery shells every day in the Bakhmut area alone. Mr. Borrell said Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba had told his EU counterpart at a meeting in Stockholm that Kyiv needed more support to defend itself against Russia's invasion. In March, EU ministers approved a plan worth at least €2 billion to supply Ukraine with 1 million rounds of artillery ammunition and missiles over 12 months.
In this meeting, Minister Kuleba has explained the situation in the ground, how Russia continues bombing systematically, and the requirement to the European Union for more support. And certainly we have to speed up the support. And give me a figure, just a figure. In the Bakhmut area, where fighting continues, Ukraine needs about 1,000 shots of artillery per day. 1,000 per day just in Bakhmut, in order to have an idea of the intensity of the fighting and the firepower of the Russia and how the Ukrainians can resist this continuous and systematic bombing. When we talk about this war, we need to talk about the range of the ammunition, because the Russians are bombing from far away. So the Ukrainians have to have the capacity to reach the same distance, the same range. Not any kind of ammunition is useful for them.
Ukraine is a issue that I think the whole world is compounded by right now. We all try and address it in our own different ways. We all try and address it from the lessons that we've learned from history. I think a lesson a country like Pakistan has learned that percolation of conflict is never the answer, that we want an end to hostilities, an end to conflict, so people can go back to building lives rather than destroying more lives before we start rebuilding. We want the process of rebuilding of lives, of diplomacy, of solutions as quickly as possible.
Well, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said his main focus was on securing more long-range artillery ammunition and short-range accession talks to join the 27-member bloc. Ukraine applied to join the EU 4 days after Russian troops poured across its border in February. Mr. Kuleba has described the current situation in his country as very bad.
To cut long story short, main topics of my conversation with EU foreign ministers today will be long-range artillery ammunition and short-range accession talks. Every day we are trying to kick the enemy out. The enemy tries to take new positions, to grab more land. No big developments, and I think it's actually very bad because we got used to it. It's impossible to get used to people's deaths, but it's only now that I understand what the title of the famous novel All Quiet on the Western Front meant. When you wake up, you read the news, and basically you come to the conclusion that all is more or less quiet. But someone is dying there. Someone is fighting for a trench. Someone is trying to defend the trench, and someone else is trying to take over the trench. So we are in the anticipation of big events. I will say I appreciate everything that is being done for Ukraine. I sincerely appreciate it. But I will say that enough was done when we win, when we win together. That will be the moment when I will say, guys, you did brilliantly. And I think this is also the understanding that we have with our friends. Instead of asking, when will the counteroffensive begin, ask, have I done enough for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to begin and be successful?
Well, back to the front lines now. Russia and Ukraine both claim to have launched more attacks on each other's military equipment and other targets in multiple locations. According to Russia's defense ministry, the Russian army has repelled multiple attacks by the Ukrainian army in Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Kharkov and Bakhmut. The Russian army also used high-precision weapons to strike targets, such as Ukrainian command posts, military bases and places of storing ammunition, weapons and military equipment received from Western countries. The Russian air defense system also intercepted multiple Ukrainian rockets and drones, On the same day, the ministry announced that 2 Russian military commanders died in the conflict. Meanwhile, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said the Ukrainian army repelled multiple attacks by the Russian army in Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Marinka. The Ukrainian Air Force launched several airstrikes on Russia and intercepted several Russian drones. The Ukrainian missile and artillery units also struck important targets, such as the Russian command posts and artillery positions.